It may seem like I'm standing in the middle of a forest, and I am, or at least I was. 2 years ago, this entire area was clear-cut. All that remains here now are the thousands of stumps, like tombstones in a cemetery, a reminder of the forest that once stood here. Since the beginning of time, humanity has endeavored to live forever. Whether in search of the fountain of youth or the Holy Grail, our quest is the same: to escape this dreaded curse that every generation has failed to overcome. It plagues every nation, every man, woman, and child, every bird in the heavens and every fish in the sea. Magnificent forests, entire ecosystems, and kings and great nations have collapsed under its power. Its grasp has encircled the earth. It has touched and plagued every living thing on our planet. This dreaded curse is summed up in one word that falls upon our ears like the palls of death, and that word is unsustainable. Sustainability. It is defined as a system that maintains its own viability by using techniques that allow for continual reuse. In short, it is an adjective used to describe a system that can operate perpetually. Here in the 21st century, achieving sustainability is the chief ambition of the world's greatest minds. Like a black, thunderous cloud on the horizon, the inevitable results of unsustainable practices are trumpeting their impending doom down to present day. Businessmen and women, analysts and artists, taxi drivers and scuba divers, farmers and philosophers, scientists and students of all walks of life now gaze into the future, unable to turn their eyes from the grim outlook of all our unsustainable world has to offer. The inevitable consequences of an unsustainable world have become the inspiration for movies, books, television, even national and international policies and laws. In fact, the United Nations Environmental Program stated, "The world remains on unsustainable track despite hundreds of internationally agreed goals and objectives." The report assessed the condition of our ozone, air pollution, the loss of our planet's biodiversity, fish populations, diminishing water quality and quantity, extreme weather events, deforestation, and the increase of waste, among other issues. The 3-year-long study, conducted by more than 600 experts worldwide, still maintains if humanity does not urgently change its ways, several critical thresholds may be exceeded, beyond which abrupt and generally irreversible changes to the life support functions of the planet could occur. In other words, if we don't change something soon, we're all going to die. So what needs to change? If over 500 internationally agreed upon goals and objectives and the world's greatest experts cannot create a sustainable world, who can? By the end of this video, you will be able to definitively answer that question and truly understand the only sustainable thing. I'll even give you a clue. The only sustainable thing is very simple, however, it is absolutely impossible for mankind to achieve, and yet it will happen. Sound cryptic? Stay with me and you will see for yourself why this is true. After the President gave his State of the Union address in 2014, U.S. News and World Report simply said, right now the State of the Union is, in a word, unsustainable, and that needs to change. We are facing a new world, and we can't meet its challenges without new ideas and a new vision. Neither our country nor our world can hope to achieve a sustainable planet if we do not first understand why our planet is unsustainable. U.S. News and World Report begins to dig at this concept when they wrote, "America would be well served if the President stakes a broader claim to explain to the nation why sustainability is truly the defining challenge of our time." So why is sustainability the defining challenge of our time? In Chris Martinson's book, The Crash Course, he discusses the unsustainable future of our economy, energy, and environment. In this book, he writes, "The world is in economic crisis, and there are no easy fixes to our predicament." Unsustainable trends in the economy, energy, and the environment have finally caught up with us, and we are converging on a very narrow window of time, the 20-teens. Here is our answer. Sustainability is the defining challenge of our time because now we're going to have to deal with the consequences of our actions in the immediate future. So, how did we get here? Let's turn back the clock and take a look. In 1913, the US dollar was a promissory note. A dollar represented a fixed amount of gold or silver in the US Treasury. For example, $20 were worth $20 in gold. However, in 1971, President Nixon took the country off the gold standard.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets.
More dollars were printed, and therefore the value of the dollar decreased. Today, the estimated value of the dollar is about 4.1 cents. Furthermore, every dollar printed by the Federal Reserve Bank and loaned to the United States government comes attached with debt, which makes paying off that loan mathematically impossible. So we, in our unsustainable ways, just take out a bigger loan. Today, the debt owed by the United States is more than $18 trillion, and if that's too much debt, we just raise the debt ceiling to avoid a, quote, terrible accident called economic collapse. 200 years ago, most American families grew their own food on plenty of green pasture land. Fruits and vegetables were grown with pure water and sunshine. Today, they are grown with chemicals, lots of them. Farmers used to take special care to protect the food. Today, they're careful to protect themselves from the chemicals they're spraying on your food. Chemical use has become so prolific, Science Daily reported use of fertilizers and pesticides and habitat destruction has also caused a major extinction event. Chemical use has destroyed our soil, and once again, more chemicals are added to keep plants growing, even going so far as to invent genetically modified plants that can survive the chemicals they are sprayed with. These chemicals are not good for the soil, the plant, the people, or the environment. They are only good for one thing: profit. Raising livestock has also changed. Animals are kept indoors with no sunshine, clean air, or water. Instead of grazing on green grass, they are fed genetically modified grain in confined spaces, sometimes unable even to turn around. As a direct result of poor diet and living conditions, the animals become sick. This is solved by injecting the animals with more chemicals. Various vaccines, antibiotics, and drugs are used to keep these disabled, diseased, and dying animals alive until slaughtered so you can eat them. Inevitably, the people become sick, and the solution is the same: take antibiotics, drugs, and vaccines. Instead of searching out the cause of the problem, our medical experts tell us we need to add more chemicals to our bodies to keep us alive as well. Which brings us to another unsustainable problem plaguing our nation: healthcare. As a nation and a planet, we are sicker than any generation that has previously existed on Earth. And therefore, unsurprisingly, the CDC tells us rising healthcare costs are unsustainable, and Time magazine refers to our nation's solution as the unsustainable US healthcare system. The same people who have been appointed at government agencies to protect the public from such health issues are the same people who work for the companies who make the chemicals that make us sick. If that weren't unsustainable enough, it's actually illegal in parts of the country to grow your own food at home. At least one insurance executive had the sense to assess the cause of the healthcare crisis. In an article about the spending of healthcare being unsustainable, he referred to a study by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, which concluded as much as 75% of US healthcare spending is linked to those individual poor choices: smoking, alcohol, and drug consumption, overeating, or making poor food choices. All of these contribute to health problems like diabetes, obesity, addiction, and even cancer. In other words, what makes our healthcare system unsustainable is the American lifestyle. It is literally making us sick, killing us, and costing the nation trillions. What about the unsustainable deterioration of morality? Just 4 decades ago, major problems in schools included chewing gum, running down the hallway, and throwing spitballs. Now school problems include rape, drug dealing, assault, and even murder. We scarcely stop to think about what we put in our bodies. How much less do we stop to think about what we're putting in our minds? When I was growing up, profanity on TV was against the law. Now the grossest expletives are commonplace. Family values have been replaced by career-oriented values. Either by choice or by necessity, both mothers and fathers enter the workplace, leaving others to raise their children. Schools and educational institutions now mold the minds of our children, imbuing them with the state-sponsored morality and worldview. Instead of fostering creativity and independent thought in the classroom, the children are taught what to think, making them nothing more than a reflector of other men's thoughts. Success in schools is directly proportionate to the degree to which one can memorize and regurgitate back information, and the most decorated graduates are heralded as examples of academic success. Every succeeding generation is intellectually, fiscally, morally, and spiritually more destitute than the last, and to add insult to injury, we look back over the changes in this country in the last 100 years and call this progress. Princes, presidents, kings, celebrities, Hollywood, and even the Pope all tell us our way of life is so unsustainable that life on Earth as we know it cannot and will not continue if we do not change our course.
But the tools are in our hands if we apply them before it is too late.
We have flattened our forests, hunted entire species to extinction, polluted our oceans, lakes, rivers, streams, our soil, and the air we breathe. The colossal impact man has had on this planet in the last century has left geologists debating whether or not they should distinguish our era as a new epoch of time called the Anthropocene, meaning the epoch of man. The footprint of man's supposed progress in the last century, instead of being a blessing to the earth and its inhabitants, has instead revealed itself to be a plague. This idea is perpetually reinforced in the movies where people are taught the problem with the world today is them.
Every mammal on this planet instinctively develops a natural equilibrium with the surrounding environment, but you humans do not.
We're not gonna make it, are we? People, I mean.
It's in your nature to destroy yourselves.
Wouldn't you know, rising toxicity levels have made life unsustainable on Earth.
Unsustainable? What?
You multiply and multiply until every natural resource is consumed.
Exhausted our natural resources.
The only way you can survive is to spread to another area.
In an era of expansion, our race spread out through the stars, seeking new worlds to settle upon.
There is another organism on this planet that follows the same pattern. Do you know what it is? A virus.
Unarguably, the most unsustainable thing on Earth is man. But what is it about us that makes us unsustainable? The effects of our unsustainable methods manifest themselves in a million ways, but they all stem from one common defect. What I want to do now is take a good close look at the one common motive that is the cause of all these problems, because only by investigating the cause can we understand the solution and know once and for all what truly is the only sustainable thing. I'm here at the cemetery because I think it's pretty obvious to all of us. The ultimate end of unsustainability is death. That's what unsustainable means. It can't go on forever. Therefore, if you really think about it, finding the key ingredient for true sustainability would mean finding the key to eternal life. So as much as we all talk about wanting to be sustainable, is it even possible? It all comes down to finding out what makes sustainability possible. And we are going to find out what the key ingredient is. Are you ready? A sustainable system. This is what we want. Even more so, this is what we need. The real question then becomes, what is necessary in order to have a sustainable system? It was December of 2013. I was back home visiting my family, and my brother insisted I watch a TED Talk called How I Fell in Love with a Fish. I was not terribly interested, but before I knew it, the video had begun. The presentation was given by a chef named Dan Barber, who was asked to address the problem of the decreasing numbers of fish available to restaurants.
How do we keep fish on our menus? For the past 50 years, we've been fishing the seas like we clear-cut forests. It's hard to overstate the destruction.
The depletion of fish forced the food industry to turn to fish farms, which are also unsustainable.
Fish farms pollute, and they're inefficient. Take tuna. It's got a feed conversion ratio of 15 to 1. That means it takes 15 pounds of wild fish to get you 1 pound of farmed tuna. Not very sustainable.
Later in the video, he is introduced to a sustainable fish farm in Spain called Veta La Palma. It's a 27,000-acre fish farm. They have bass, mullet, shrimp, eel, and more. Their ecological system is so rich and healthy, there is no feed for the fish. They eat what they would normally eat in the wild. The sustainable fish farm is also a bird sanctuary, home to more than 600,000 birds of over 250 different species. Interestingly, the health of this system is demonstrated by the health of the birds. This sustainable fish farm is located at the end of the Guadalajara River. In this river, you find all the normal chemicals, contaminants, pesticides, and runoff and other pollutants that you would expect to find in most rivers. But when the water leaves the fish farm and dumps into the Atlantic, it's purified water. So this sustainable fish farm does not feed its fish, it measures the health of the fish system by the health of its predators, and furthermore, it is a bird sanctuary and a water purification system. So what is the key ingredient that makes this a sustainable system? Dan Barber was talking with the farm's head biologist named Miguel, and here's what he had to say.
Here he's pointing out a rare black-shouldered kite. Now he's mentioning the mineral needs of phytoplankton. And here he sees a grouping pattern that reminds him of the Tanzanian giraffe. I asked him how he became such an expert on fish. He said, fish. I didn't know anything about fish. I'm an expert in relationships.
When it comes to sustainability, it's all about the relationship of each component that makes up the system. We see this also in the Environmental Protection Agency's definition for sustainability. They say sustainability creates and maintains the conditions under which humans and nature can exist in productive harmony that permit fulfilling the social, economic, and other requirements of present and future generations. The word harmony defines the type of relationship needed to be sustainable. So sustainability is all about creating and maintaining a harmonious relationship. The EPA's definition is a pretty good one, but if you think about it, it just tells us what the result of a sustainable system is. It doesn't tell us what makes something sustainable because it doesn't tell us what is needed to have harmony. So let's break this down and really get to the root of what makes something sustainable. We're going to build a sustainable model by reverse engineering it. We are going to look at what the results of a sustainable system are and then examine what is necessary to create that result. In this manner, we will work our way backwards until we arrive at the one ingredient that makes sustainability possible. We've seen from the example of the fish farm that in order to have a sustainable system, we have to have a harmonious relationship between all the components of the system. So let's add a harmonious relationship as a requirement for a sustainable system. Now, if we need harmony in order to be sustainable, then what do we need in order to have harmony? Some may say harmonious relationship or sustainability is a matter of balancing supply and demand. But let's take the world's food supply, for example. The general thought is that if mankind produces more food than we consume, it would be considered a harmonious relationship and therefore sustainable. However, we can know for certain that this is not the case, because the truth is our planet produces more than enough food for every man and animal on Earth. Almost half the world's food supply thrown away, says a 2013 report. It does not even factor in the food on your plate that you don't eat. Each American, for example, throws away $640 of food every year. But in Europe, the Brits are the worst offenders. The United Nations figures aren't much better, citing around 30 to 40% of the world's food is lost or thrown away annually. So what does this mean? It means the world hunger is not about a lack of food, it's about an unequal distribution of food. So if we want to have a harmonious relationship, it must be comprised of two things. One, being the supply must be greater than or equal to the demand, and secondly, an equal distribution of resources. If we look at the financial world, we see the same problem. In 2014, Forbes magazine reported the 85 richest people in the world have as much wealth as the 3.5 billion poorest. This was due to what the report called a growing tide of inequality. The article also stated high levels of wealth concentration can harm democracy, and the laws are skewed to favor the rich in areas ranging from financial deregulation, tax laws favoring the wealthy and facilitation tax evasion, austerity economics, policies that disproportionately harm women, and oil and mineral revenues. Think about this for a moment. The result of this unequal distribution of wealth leads to the other people in this democratic system suffering harm. And that's the ultimate conclusion. If one people group or one component of any system suffers harm, it's not a harmonious relationship, and therefore it is not sustainable. Since there must be no harm in order to have a harmonious relationship, let's add no harm as another vital principle needed for sustainability. But now the question becomes, how can each party in this relationship be protected so a harmonious relationship is maintained? When I looked up the definition of harmony, I found this on Wikipedia. Harmony involves chords and their construction and chord progressions and the principles of connection that govern them. In order to have harmony in music, you must have principles, rules, or laws that govern the relationship of all the sounds. Now, how about in society? Are laws necessary to govern the relationships of people in order to maintain harmony? In the article titled "Why Laws Exist," the first principle mentioned is called the harm principle. We read that laws created under the harm principle are written to protect people from being harmed by others. So that's pretty simple. The reason we have laws is to govern the relationships of people so nobody gets hurt. Since law is a required component to ensure there's no harm, let's add laws to our sustainability model. And now that we have laws to protect people from being harmed by others, everyone will enjoy a harmonious relationship and we will have a sustainable system, right? Wrong. There are more laws on the books than anyone can count, and still everywhere we look today, people and animals are being harmed. Robbery, murder, lies, abuse, and every other form of crime is found everywhere. In America, there are hundreds of thousands of laws, maybe even millions. In the year 2010 alone, over 40,000 new laws were added to the books. How many more laws do we need before the people won't hurt each other? The obvious answer is, that answer is negated by the inescapable fact that laws don't work. They are a deterrent at best. Here's why laws don't work. We are a race of beings with free will, which means we all have the capacity to do whatever we want. Free will is a great thing, but it poses some very real problems, namely getting everyone to act within the confines of laws so that nobody gets hurt. And this is where mankind's ability to ensure sustainability really starts to break down, because ensuring the actions of every being on Earth are obedient to the rule of law is going to be impossible. It is not impossible because there aren't enough laws or even enough law enforcement. It is impossible by nature of the fact that man has free will. Irregardless of the obvious challenges this poses, in order to have a society where there is no harm, there must be laws to define what harm is and what it isn't. Even if those laws are impartial and perfect, the effectiveness of those laws to protect people from harm depends entirely on the actions of every person being in conformity with those laws. So let's add actions to our list as a prerequisite for those laws to work. If we want to know how to have genuine sustainability, we need to keep digging. So let's keep exploring this further, beginning with asking the next logical question. Why do people act in violation of law? When a man is caught stealing something from a store, there is a consequence for his action and he is put in jail. So why didn't the law work? Was there some fault in the legislation? Obviously, the reason why the law was broken had nothing to do with the law itself. It had to do with the man. Therefore, it wouldn't matter if we had 1 billion laws, or even if they were all rigidly enforced. There would still be crime and people would still get hurt, because there is still something fundamentally unsustainable about the actions of mankind, and we must get to the root of it. So let's ask another probing question. When did the man break the law? Was it when he stole from the store or at some other time? If you really think about this, he actually broke the law before he stole from the store. When the man stole from the store, he was just carrying out the action of what he had already decided to do in his mind. Think about this crime as a process. It did not begin with the act of stealing. It began much earlier when he entertained the idea of stealing from the store.
Hannah suddenly felt her great cloud of sadness disappear. She looked peaceful as she went back to Elkanah. No sound came out. The old priest was sure she had been drinking.
In order to move a muscle or even walk, we must first think about the action we want to perform, and then our brain sends the signal to our body to put our thoughts into action. In the same way, our actions always follow our thoughts. Therefore, the deep-rooted problem of unsustainability of man involves the thoughts of his mind. If we look at our sustainability model, we know laws alone are not enough. True sustainability requires our actions to be in harmony with law, and in order for our actions to be in harmony with the law, it involves our thoughts. So let's add thoughts to our model. Now you might be thinking, I can think about doing something that would break the law and harm somebody else, but that doesn't necessarily mean I will act on it. And that is true. But if you didn't think about it in the first place, there is no chance you would act it out. So what determines whether you act out your thoughts or not? This question brings us to our final requirement. How about this question? Where do our thoughts come from? What is it that shapes or inspires our thoughts? Someone may say our thoughts are inspired by external stimulus or circumstances. For example, maybe our thief lost his job, so he robbed the store to help feed his family. However, another man in the same position may choose not to rob the store.
And then she ran home as fast as she could go.
So why would one man choose to break the law and another choose not to break the law if they were both faced with the same circumstances? The only viable answer to this question is that it all comes down to the principles of the heart. One man believes his pain does not make it okay for him to harm someone else, and he chooses not to do wrong, while the other man, who broke the law, decides it is permissible or necessary for him to ease his burden by hurting someone else. The difference between these two men all boils down to one single solitary principle of the heart: selfishness or selflessness. You see, the criminal in this example made a decision to steal from the store, but deeper than that, he made a decision to take something from someone else at their expense in order to benefit himself. This is a selfish motive. On the other hand, the man who did not steal from the store would have come to this decision because at some point he determined that he would not harm someone else in order to benefit himself. This is a selfless motive. The real difference between the two men was a matter of character. Character is not merely a matter of philosophy or religion, it is also very much a matter of science. You see, evolution is based upon the principle of selfishness. The term survival of the fittest is a phrase that originated from Darwinian evolutionary theory as a way of describing the mechanism of natural selection. In the evolutionary model, every creature serves itself at the expense of other creatures. With the man that robbed the store, is it more likely that he believed in a loving creator or in Darwinian evolution? The survival of the fittest morale teaches him that it is okay for him to be selfish if it is necessary for his survival. Now, when you have an entire nation that believes, advocates, and protects evolution by law, is it any wonder that there is a proportionate rise in the frequency of selfishness and crime in that same country?
Scholars still debate the causes of the catastrophe known as World War I. The conflict drew support from a virulent form of militarism that claimed to be based on biological science. Leading German thinkers argued that war was an evolutionary necessity, a natural outgrowth of the Darwinian struggle for survival.
The roar of approval given to the entry of the German teams proved to many that the games really were going to be used for propaganda, to show the world the excellence of the blonde, blue-eyed, so-called true-blooded German people.
You can now see how something as simple as the principles behind our understanding of science has a direct bearing on the safety and value of our own lives. Evolution produces exactly what it teaches: selfishness. And surely we observe selfishness at work in nature, but is that all science has to teach us? Perhaps in our effort to see the big picture, we miss the big clues right under our noses. The evolution of altruism, selflessness in ants, that's fighting talk. Leading biologists are at each other's throats over a quirk in evolution. Aside from the fact the ants are selfless while the scientists are fighting with each other, the discovery of an altruistic creature has some significant ramifications for science, because the discovery of a selfless creature threatens the paradigm. The article states Darwin himself singled out ants as posing the most important challenge to his theory, and the poster boy of evolution, Richard Dawkins, even wrote a book on this topic called The Selfish Gene. In spite of this quirk in evolution, scientists will invariably squeeze it into an evolutionary model. The only conclusion is that the idea that science is a disinterested quest for truth, where only rational argument counts, is a myth. Like any human endeavor, it is swayed by fashions, by belief, and sometimes even by the lynch mob. How about this article from Science Buzz? The Ultimate Sacrifice. A few ants selflessly give up for the good of the colony each night. The article states that scientists have observed behavior in ants in Brazil where a small group of ants sacrifice themselves each night for the good of the colony by covering the colony entrance from the outside. Often the ants on the outside don't make it through the night, being exposed to low temperatures, wind, predators, and other conditions, and thus sacrifice themselves so those within the colony are safe. Or how about this article from Scientific American? Infectious Selflessness, How an Ant Colony Becomes a Social Immune System. It says the ants were found licking their neighbors to remove the fungal spores before the pathogens sprout and grow. Apparently, such grooming dilutes the infection, spreading it thinly across the colony instead of leaving their infected peers to deal with the infection on their own and die. Healthy ants share the burden, deliberately infecting everyone in the colony with a tiny dose of fungus that each individual's immune system can clear on its own. If evolution is true, how is it possible for selflessness to exist? Nature.com reports altruism can be explained by natural selection. They say the analysis have begun to spark controversy among scientists who are already highly divided on the issue of how altruistic behaviors evolve. In other words, the scientists agree natural selection can explain selflessness, but none of them agree on how. Scientists observe selflessness, but they can't explain it. Another article states, is survival of the fittest finished? Scientists prove that generosity, not selfishness, is the only way modern civilization can survive. In other words, they're finding out that selflessness is sustainable. How did they discover this? Through a demonstration. How was the sustainability of selflessness demonstrated? Yes, it was through the ants. The article says it's long been thought that humans evolved by looking out for themselves and making selfish decisions. Yet it appears this evolution theory may have taken a turn as scientists discover being generous and working as a team is now the only way we can survive. The scientists conclude saying, our paper shows that no selfish strategies will succeed in evolution, Plotkin said. The only strategies that are evolutionarily robust are generous ones. In the conflict between creation and evolution, it was a demonstration of altruism that led the scientists to see that selflessness is the only sustainable thing. Science is not the only arena that tells us selflessness is the only way civilization can survive. On this Hindu website, I found an article called Selfishness, the Greatest Disease of Mankind. In the author's conclusion, we read, selfishness is the greatest of all diseases. Heal humanity of it, and the world becomes a paradise. This is Burke, Idaho, one of the last mining towns to succumb to the modern world. Back in the 1800s, these mining towns were booming. The prospect of finding large amounts of silver, zinc, or even gold brought thousands of people to these remote places, all hoping to strike it rich. But how many of them do you suppose came here to be a blessing to the others that were here? Of the thousands that flocked to these mining towns, how many do you suppose came to meet the needs of their fellow man, to support one another and build up people instead of building up buildings? Probably not many. And today, Burke is a ghost town, a grim reminder that all our selfish pursuits in life will likewise come to an end. And then, what will it all be worth? The people that built up this town have likewise perished with their dreams and aspirations. Towns like this should make us pause and really ponder the purpose of life. Is life all about making ends meet and working to get rich? How many millions today are still searching for wealth and prosperity in the minds of the modern world? Look at the legacy such pursuits have left behind. Selflessness. Could this really be the core ingredient needed for true sustainability? Let's put it to the test. For our purposes here in this video, let's apply a selfless motive to some of the unsustainable examples mentioned earlier. Remember the Forbes magazine article saying that 85 of the richest people own as much wealth as half of the world's population? Well, what if those 85 people were genuinely selfless individuals? What would the distribution of wealth look like then? In fact, what if all 7 billion people on Earth were all completely selfless? The world economy might function a little more like the early disciples in the Bible, where it was written, "Your abundance may be a supply for their want, that their abundance also may be a supply for your want, that there may be equality. As it is written, he that had gathered much had nothing over, and he that had gathered little had no lack." If we all follow this advice, some might have more and others less, but everyone would have exactly what they need. Imagine that. There would be no poor people, no homeless people, nor anyone who lacked food or clothing or an education. Now, let's look at another example. Remember the article showing that 30 to 50% of the world's food supply is thrown away? If everyone on Earth was selfless, how different would that statistic be?
Got some stuff for you. Hungry? You hungry today? There's a sandwich for you.
Here's another pair of socks in here.
Fruit salad, you like fruit salad? Why do I do this? I guess it's just the rush I get when I do something good for someone and don't expect anything back. Seeing them smile, it's seriously one of the most amazing feelings in the world. It's awesome, and more people should do it.
If even one person was without a meal, there would be 6,999,999,999 people, all willing to give of what they have to ensure that not one other soul is without the food they need. Take a look at this video that illustrates this point. Imagine a world where everyone is fed, where no one lives without shelter. Imagine a world where no one steals something that doesn't belong to them. You wouldn't need locks on your house or a car or on anything. Imagine a world where no one lies or cheats and no one takes the life of any other living thing.
Ready? Kick it!
Fear would be vanquished from the earth, for there would be no reason to feel unsafe or unloved if everyone had a genuine selfless love and concern for one another. It looks as if true sustainability, therefore, depends on every human being having and maintaining a selfless heart. And therefore, let's add selfless heart to our model. If we start with the selfless loving heart as our motive, let's see what happens if we build on this foundation. We know our heart will influence our thoughts, so a selfless heart will produce selfless thoughts. We know our actions follow our thoughts, so if we have selfless heart that produces selfless thoughts, those selfless thoughts will in turn produce selfless actions. And these selfless actions will be in harmony with the law, resulting in no harm coming to anyone or anything else, which means we will have a harmonious relationship. And at last, we will have a sustainable system. By this simple process of logic, we have discovered that a selfless love for one another is the core principle needed for genuine sustainability. Without selflessness, nothing will be sustainable. Now, by contrast, what happens if we have a selfish character? It will result in selfish thoughts, and then selfish actions will follow. And because they are selfish, they pay no regard to laws, when by breaking the law they can benefit themselves, even if it means others will be harmed. There is no harmony, just unequal distribution of food, wealth, resources, just as it is in our world right now. It may seem like the selfish individual may prosper, but ultimately the end result of selfishness, because it is unsustainable, is death. And the proverb goes, "There is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death." The process of selfishness works like cancer. In this article, cancer is called the selfish cell. The article states that most of the time the body's cells work together harmoniously, each contributing to the greater good. Healthy cells in the body work together harmoniously, meaning they have a sustainable relationship. Why? Because they contribute to the greater good. In other words, even on a cellular level, our body is designed to operate by selfless principles. But this is not true of cancer. Cancer cells, which divide and colonize the body, are an exception to this rule. They prosper at the expense of other cells, but also seal their own fate by eventually killing the host. When it says cancer prospers at the expense of other cells, this means other cells are damaged or destroyed so cancer can live. Cancer then operates upon selfish principles. And what is the end result of selfishness? Ultimately, it always leads to death, even killing the host. Is it possible humans living on this planet are like selfish cancer cells, each striving to prosper even at the expense of others? And that the end result of our selfishness will even lead to the destruction of this planet that is hosting us? But therein lies the problem. From the cradle to the grave, selfishness governs the conduct of our character. It determines everything we do, from what we eat to where we go. It determines how we spend our money and how we make it. Sure, we may have moments of selfless acts, and they are beautiful, such as a man placing a coat on the shoulders of a shivering child in the streets of New York, or when he shares $100 he was just given with another homeless stranger. Even wolves befriending bears, or a man befriending lions or crocodiles or kittens. When selflessness flashes through humanity, or even through the animal kingdom, it illuminates our dark world with a piercing beauty like the stars on the black velvet of the night sky. Imagine if every living thing on earth was imbued with a character of perfect selflessness. It would be heaven on earth. Our world as we know it today, however, is far short of perfection. It's riddled with pain, sorrow, and strife, because at our very core, selfishness is our nature. So how do we break the cycle of selfishness? Is it even possible? Or are we doomed to self-destruct like we see in the movies? Can we change our own nature? Can science make us selfless? Can religion? There are 11-step programs, selfless guides, how-to videos, and TED Talks. But I'm not talking merely about acting selflessly. 100% sustainability requires a complete change of our nature, from the inside out. So let's get to the root of our unsustainability problem by investigating what it actually takes to make a human being selfless. Rather than sift through a worldwide web full of frivolous ideas without a compass, let's set up some requirements by which we can measure the potential of a source or a solution to make us selfless. For example, it would make sense to start by considering anyone, but they must first believe that 100% selflessness is achievable. Second, they must demonstrate that they are themselves 100% selfless. This means their heart, mind, words, and deeds are always selfless without exception. The very core of their character must be selfless. If we are to take anything they have to say seriously, they must demonstrate genuine selflessness can be achieved. Otherwise, whatever they say will remain in the realm of theory, never becoming fact. Third, of those who claim this can be done and have demonstrated that they are selfless themselves, let us only consider those who have been able to change the heart or character of someone else other than themselves. They must be able to demonstrate their approach to changing another person's selfish character into a selfless character really works. With these three requirements, we're certain to find someone or something that can change the principle of our selfish hearts and make us a truly sustainable people. That is, of course, if this is even possible. These requirements are a tall order, but if sustainability is at all possible, and if all three of these requirements are demonstrated, then we are sure to find the answers we're seeking. So, with these requirements as a litmus test, where do we begin to look? As for me, I started where any other person from this century would begin a long quest for knowledge. I did a Google search. I typed in, "Who can change my character so I can be more selfless?" The first link that popped up was for a movie, which I didn't think would help. So I clicked on the second link and up popped a blog called 3 Questions to Help You Live Selfless in a Selfie World. In the third paragraph, the author wrote, "Navigating the world of selfies is especially challenging for those who claim to look at Jesus as their role model for how to live. Jesus happens to be the most selfless character I can think of. Imagine the selflessness needed for the King of Kings to leave his throne in heaven and take on the form of a tiny, helpless baby. He lived in a humble home, growing up, and worked as a carpenter before launching into his ministry. Even in his ministry, he wandered town to town, visiting the poorest areas and people. He didn't build himself a beautiful platform and expect others to come to him. He was looking for those who were lost, those who needed healing, those who were willing to receive the gift he had for them." Now I know many people are thinking, "Oh, forget it, I've heard enough of this Jesus character." But let me ask you, how badly do you really want to live a sustainable life? If we eliminate certain possibilities based on our preconceived notions, then we are preventing ourselves from investigating and arriving at that which might be true. I believe that if something is true, it will bear investigation. Therefore, let's not limit our options. All solutions are on the table. So let's investigate the claims of this selfless king named Jesus. First, we said they must claim to believe selflessness is possible. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus makes an interesting statement. He says, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect." But what does he mean by perfect? What is it about God that makes him perfect? Well, according to 1 John chapter 4 and verse 16, God is love. The Greek word for love here is the word agape. Regarding the word agape, Wikipedia had this statement to share, saying C.S. Lewis in his book, The Four Loves, used agape to describe what he believed was the highest level of love known to humanity, a selfless love, a love that was passionately committed to the well-being of the other. In other words, the attribute of God that makes him perfect is his selfless love. Jesus said to a wealthy young man, "If thou wilt be perfect, go and sell that thou hast, and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me." This challenge brought to light the imperfection of the young man's heart, revealing his selfishness. His love was not perfect, and therefore, when the young man heard that saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. In Jesus' words, "If thou wilt be perfect," Jesus was letting him know the perfection of God's selfless love could be his as well. In this, and in many other ways, Jesus does indeed claim that perfect selflessness is possible. So let's look at the second criteria. Did Jesus himself demonstrate a perfectly selfless character? And above all these things, put on charity, which is the bond of perfectness. The word for charity here, also often translated as love, is again the Greek word agape, which means selflessness. So what is being said here is, above all these things, put on selflessness, which is the bond of perfectness. To be perfect means to be selfless. So what was the purpose of Jesus' entire life? When the angel appeared to Joseph in a dream, he told Joseph that Mary was going to have a son, and the angel said to him, "She shall bring forth a son, and thou shalt call his name Jesus, for he shall save his people from their sins." So Jesus' purpose in his life's mission is to save people from their sins. So what is sin according to the Bible? We read in 1 John 3:4, "Sin is transgression of the law." The law is, of course, the 10 Commandments. Any violation of this law is sin. So what does this have to do with selfishness? Pay close attention to this, because it will forever change the way you understand the 10 Commandments. Paul writes that love is the fulfilling of the law. This means the 10 Commandments are fulfilled or kept when we love one another. But the reverse is also true. When one of these commandments is broken, it is an evidence that love does not exist. Therefore, the 10 Commandments are a definition of love. Everything within the confines of this law is love, and everything outside of it lacks love. But what kind of love is this? Well, there's a chapter in the Bible nicknamed the Love chapter, and in this chapter we're told exactly what love is. In 1 Corinthians 13, the Bible says, "Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself. Love is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, and does not seek its own." Love does not seek itself, meaning this love is not a self-centered love, it is a selfless love. It is altruistic, always seeking the benefit and welfare of others. Paul also says in Romans 13, "He that loveth another hath fulfilled the law." In Galatians we read, "Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." And all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." The 10 Commandments are not merely a list of commandments. Rather, at the core, it is a law of selflessness. The purpose of this law is to preserve selflessness by prohibiting selfishness. So whenever one of these commandments is broken, it is an evidence that the principle of selfless love has been violated by selfishness. This law is a boundary God gave to mankind to help us understand what love really is. So if there is any record of Jesus committing a sin or a selfish act by breaking any of the 10 Commandments, we can eliminate him as a possibility for our test. But Jesus said in John chapter 15 and verse 10, "I have kept my Father's commandments." Now, saying it is one thing, proving it is another. So how about a couple witnesses? When Jesus was brought to trial for sedition and blasphemy, Pontius Pilate investigated Jesus and said, quote, "I find in him no fault at all," end quote. Peter wrote that we are redeemed with the precious blood of Christ as a lamb without blemish and without spot. Paul, the persecutor of Christians after his conversion, wrote, "Jesus, the Son of God, was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin." Those who follow Jesus, along with his enemies, and even the man who sentenced him to death, all declared that Jesus was innocent. He was without sin, meaning he had committed no selfish act throughout his entire life. What Jesus said was true: "I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love." Jesus did demonstrate a perfectly selfless character. Not once did he speak, act, think, or even eat for selfish reasons. From his birth in a manger to his death on the cross, nowhere was his life corrupted by the smallest stain of selfishness. But let's take this test to the extreme. In order to be a perfect and complete example of selflessness, Jesus would need to demonstrate the greatest act of selflessness that can be made. In his own words, he revealed what this act would be and said, "Greater love or we might say greater selflessness, hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Nailed to the cross, bloody and beaten, the soldiers cried out, He saved others, himself he cannot save. If he be the King of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe him. If Jesus was the Son of God, he could have easily rescued himself. Do you remember when Jesus was first arrested, Peter tried to save Jesus from the soldiers? But he said to Peter, Thinkest thou that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels? You see, Jesus could have easily saved himself by employing the angels at his command. But you know what? This would have been a selfish thing to do. Jesus did not save himself because he knew if he did, you and I would all be lost. With his last breath, he gave us a demonstration of the greatest act of selfless love as he laid down his life for us. It is because he had all the power of God and chose not to use any of it for himself that it can be said Jesus was the greatest and only example of perfect selflessness that was ever given to man.
It is finished. Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit.
Jesus' example of selflessness was not only for us to witness, but for us to follow. Whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself, Jesus said. To follow Jesus, a Christian is called to a life of self-denial, because this is the life that Jesus exemplified. For even the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many. This man, claiming to be the Son of God, came to our planet to live by example a life of perfect, selfless love. And for this purpose, those who follow him are called to live a selfless life just as he did. As it is written, He died for all, that they which live should not henceforth live unto themselves, but unto him which died for them and rose again. In giving sight to the blind, a voice to the mute, hearing to the deaf, and mobility to the lame, Jesus consistently demonstrated his life of devotion to others, even to the washing of the disciples' feet. But now, Jesus goes further and calls you and I to a life of selflessness as well. He said, For I have given you an example that ye should do as I have done to you. And this leads us to our third and final test question. Can Jesus make us selfless people? My life was transformed 11 years ago. I lived and worked in the film industry pursuing my own selfish ambitions. But after I invited Christ into my life, the principal motives of my heart and mind were fundamentally altered. I decided to leave a high-paying job and career path in the film industry to work in ministry because I care more about your welfare than your entertainment and more about your eternal life than my physical life. Maybe there is someone you know whose life has been transformed by Christ. But this book, the Bible, from start to finish, testifies that Jesus is in fact a perfect example of selflessness and that he is able to change the vilest minds and hearts of men and women, making them humble, selfless, and therefore sustainable. Since this book was written, millions of people who have read the Bible have testified with their lives that they had been changed by Christ, including the millions of Christians tortured and killed during the Dark Ages, who sealed with their blood their testimony that Jesus had changed them. Untold millions more, even to this day, have by the word of their testimony proved that they love not their lives unto the death. No ethnic or people group in the history of earth has been more heavily persecuted, tortured, and systematically destroyed than have the Christians, whose core belief is that God wants them to be loving and selfless. The blood of this innumerable company of believers cries out from the forgotten volumes of history even to our day as a record and a witness that the author of this book still lives to change lives. Perhaps the ultimate proof that Jesus can change our nature from a selfish one to a selfless one is to let Him do this work in your life. Have you ever tried? David wrote, "O taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man that trusteth in Him." In other words, there is no greater evidence that Jesus can change our lives than first-hand experience. God says, "Ye shall seek me and find me when ye search for me with all your heart, and I will be found of you, saith the Lord." God is not like a man. He has nothing to prove. He is not interested in revealing Himself to skeptics to prove them wrong. On the contrary, He longs to reveal Himself to those who need Him and want Him. The Bible declares, "The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit." I know when I was at a low point in my life, when I genuinely wanted and needed Him, I asked Him to come into my life, and He did. And since then, I've never been the same. Changing our character is a seemingly impossible task. I can no more change my character than alter the course of this river through the hills. But God says the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord as the rivers of water. He turneth it whithersoever He will. So how is it God can do this? How is He able to make us selfless? In Hebrews chapter 8, God says, "For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my laws into their mind and write them in their hearts." Now we already know these laws of the Ten Commandments define selfless love, and here God promises to write these laws upon our minds and hearts. This is His promise, to change the very core of what makes us unsustainable, our heart and mind. Peter knew this when he wrote, "Whereby are given unto us exceeding great and precious promises, that by these ye might be partakers of the divine nature." What a promise indeed! And what is the purpose of that promise? It is to change our nature from our own selfish carnal nature to a divine nature of perfect selflessness. When this happens, the law of the Ten Commandments is written, not in tables of stone, but in fleshy tables of the heart. So here's the bottom line. Referring to the selfless love of God, Jesus tells us, as He told His disciples, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect." Fulfilling our first criteria, Jesus believed that 100% selflessness is achievable, and furthermore, He also demonstrated that He Himself was 100% selfless in heart, mind, words, and deeds. True to His words, He was selfless unto the death, refusing to commit a single selfish act, even to save His own life. Therefore, Jesus fulfills our second criteria by demonstrating a life of perfect selflessness. And finally, the Bible is full of testimonies and events where those who gave their lives to Jesus were radically transformed from a character of pride, selfish ambitions, and self-preservation to a character of humility and selfless love with a self-sacrificial spirit, always putting the needs and lives of others before themselves. But we don't need the Bible to know that this change is possible, or even the countless number of Christian books in print. Paul said, "Ye are our epistle, written in our hearts, known and read of all men. For as much as ye are manifestly declared to be the epistle of Christ, ministered by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not in tables of stone, but in fleshly tables of the heart." Ink and paper is not needed to prove Jesus can change you, for you will be able to see the change in living examples of those who have genuinely given themselves into Christ's hands and minister even as He ministered. Love is the basis of godliness. Whatever the profession, no man has pure love to God unless he has unselfish love for his brother. But we can never come into possession of this spirit by trying to love others. What is needed is the love of Christ in the heart. When self is merged in Christ, love springs forth spontaneously. The completeness of Christian character is attained when the impulse to help and bless others springs constantly from within, when the sunshine of heaven fills the heart and is revealed in the countenance. Day and night, through the months and seasons and years, water flows down the course of this river. In the same manner, an unceasing flow of selflessness from the heart marks the completion of Christian character. And if Christ is the only one with the power to change our character, then genuine Christianity is the only way to achieve perfect sustainability. The core necessity for any and all sustainable systems is a selfless heart, and from the heart flow the nature of all our thoughts. Jesus said, "For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All of these things come from within and defile the man." Therefore, a selfish heart will produce selfish thoughts. And when Eve wandered near the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the Bible says Eve saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise. She took of the fruit thereof, and did eat. First came the desire. She thought about eating the fruit, and her actions followed her thoughts. For after she desired the fruit, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat. This single selfish act was an act of rebellion against the law of selfless love, and an immeasurable amount of harm followed, including death, because without sustainability, death is an unavoidable inevitability. The Bible says about Jesus, "In him was life, and the life was the light of men." Mankind lived in a harmonious relationship with God, who is the source of life, but sin broke this harmonious relationship by separating us from God. Isaiah wrote, "Your iniquities have separated between you and your God, and your sins have hid his face from you." When we sin by choosing to indulge selfishness, we are separated from the source of life. And like a laptop disconnected from its source of power, its operation becomes unsustainable, and sooner or later the inevitable result is death. On the other hand, God promised that we may become partakers of the divine nature, which is love, because God is love. He made this promise when he said, "I will put my laws in their mind and write them in their hearts." When the 10 Commandments of selfless love are written in our hearts and minds, the first 2 requirements of sustainability are fulfilled. The character is impressed with a new selfless nature, and the mind likewise is impressed with selfless thoughts. And a good tree bringeth not forth corrupt fruit. From a selfless heart and mind will spring forth unselfish actions in harmony with the law of God.
They did everything, the driveway, the stoop, the whole sidewalk, all the way up to the fence.
Every single walkway had been shoveled.
I mean, I can't believe it. I cannot believe it.
The mystery shovelers weren't looking for praise. The only clue they left came in the form of a message.
They didn't try and take any credit for it.
This is what they left on the door. It says, "You got served."
Paul wrote, "Love worketh no ill to his neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law." In this one verse, the last 3 requirements are addressed. When the law is observed, love is preserved, and the result is that no ill or harm will come to your neighbor, and the mention of thy neighbor addresses the subject of relationship. When these 6 requirements are met, the result will be a sustainable life, but all 6 of them stem from the one principle of character in our heart. Therefore, we can make 2 positive conclusions from all of this. First, a selfless heart is the core requirement for any sustainable system. And second, only Jesus Christ is able to change the nature of our selfish heart into a selfless and sustainable one. True 100% sustainability is beyond the ability of man to manufacture. Man can, to some extent, persuade citizens to obey laws that prevent the harm of others, but even 100% forced obedience would not be enough to achieve sustainability. This is because man's laws can only govern man's actions, and since the actions are the manifestations of the thoughts of the heart, it is ultimately the heart that needs to be governed. Since man cannot see the thoughts or intentions of the heart cannot be governed by man, making sustainability an utter impossibility if we look to man alone. However, God can see the heart. The Bible says God saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. God is the only one able to see and govern the heart, and God's law was designed for this purpose. And so he says to us, "My son, forget not my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments." God knows that selflessness is the only sustainable thing, and that is why the foundation of His government and His throne is founded upon this law. David wrote, "Thy kingdom is an everlasting kingdom," and Luke said, "He shall reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of His kingdom there shall be no end." God's kingdom is sustainable because it is founded upon the observance of His law of selfless love. Not only does God's kingdom have no end, we also have reason to hope that this world might once again be made sustainable. We see this even in the words Jesus taught us to pray, "Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven." What is God's will? His will is that every created being shall enjoy a sustainable world without harm when all obey from the heart the law of selfless love. His will is that the thoughts, actions, and the heart of every being will be as ripples of selfless compassion drifting throughout the universe and throughout time. God's will is to make this sustainable aspiration a reality for Earth and its inhabitants. With men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. He will restore our entire planet from the curse of selfishness. For behold, I create a new heavens and a new earth. And notice how in this next statement, God reveals that everything in it will have a selfless, loving character. He says, "The wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them." He says, "They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea." And on this new planet, where the animals are in perfect harmony with man and nature, God says they shall not hurt nor destroy in all the earth, because every living thing will possess and reflect the very character of God's selfless love. If you would like to live on this new earth, you can, but the ticket to the kingdom is to know the King. You must ask Jesus Christ to forgive you for all the selfish thoughts and deeds that you have done that have harmed both you and others around you. An acknowledgement of sin is an acknowledgement of the transgression of His perfect law. And with this confession, Jesus will stamp the laws of His selfless love on your mind and heart, that you might begin the change from selfishness and death to selfless love and sustainability. This is His new covenant promise, that He will make us partakers of the divine nature, that we may dwell with Him in the kingdom that has no end. As it is written in the last chapter of the Bible, "Blessed are they that do His commandments, that they might have right to the tree of life, and may enter in through the gates into the city." This war between selfishness and selfless love within us is also being waged in the world around us. Religious sects are at war with each other, companies and corporations are in cutthroat competition, politicians argue and debate in their strife over power, mankind is fighting battles, disease and poverty, fighting in line for TVs, fighting traffic, fighting each other, fighting cancer, fighting for rights, or just fighting for life. Everywhere we look and everywhere we go, there is a perpetual inferno of conflict.
I have breast cancer.
At the end of all these controversies are two opposing principles. Selfishness and selflessness are at war in us and around us. This great war did not begin on Earth. It really did begin in a galaxy far, far away. As the pages of Revelation tell us, there was war in heaven. If we really want to understand the unsustainable nature of man, why we are here in this mess, and how this epic clash of principles will unravel in the future, then we cannot do it by looking at the events of present day. Confusion and turmoil are swirling around us on a daily basis. If we really want perspective, and if we really want to see where the trajectory of our selfish and unsustainable course is leading us, then we cannot do it by only looking at the world today. We need to go back to the very beginning. If we examine how this conflict began and we compare it to where we are today, then we will have the perspective needed to understand where we are going in the future. In part 2 of the Selfless series, we are going to go back to the beginning and see how this war began. This will be a look at history like you've never known, because this is the history of the principles that are the foundation of the very meaning of life. In the rest of the Selfless series, we will trace the movements of this war up to present day and even look into the future at the coming crisis that will involve all the inhabitants of Earth. The final clash between these two principles is about to unfold. So let's go back to the beginning, for the lost secrets of ancient history have much to tell us about the story of our future and the grand conclusion of this epic war that has become known as the Great Controversy.
The debate over Muslim refugees dominates much of the
emails that you deleted.
Hail Satan!
An awful lot about blowing up the White House.
I have a controversial pipeline in North Dakota.
Vaccinating children early with MMR vaccine.
530 sieverts per hour.
When you come to church, when you worship Him, you're not doing it for God, really. You're doing it for yourself. Because that's what makes God happy. Amen.